Hello, my name's Donna and I'd like to welcome you to this video with Creative Arts East. I'm an artist and creative practitioner living in the beautiful city of Norwich, and I'm really looking forward to taking you through this video and working together and making some really lovely, interesting pieces of art. Today we're going to be inspired by an artist called Kandinsky. There's a little picture of him, and all you'll need are a few very simple things and an ink stamp pad. The video will be in different parts. The first bit will show you all the resources that you'll need, and I'll talk you through and show you how to get ready with your space, and then we'll learn a little bit about Kandinsky and then get started and hopefully give you some techniques and some printing tools that you can find with things lying around your home, and hopefully have lots of fun along the way. So I look forward to working with you, and thank you for joining us. So what will we be using for this activity? Here in front of you are the things that you'll need. I'm just going to spend a little moment talking about them before we get started. So the first thing is an ink stamp pad, and then you'll also need a piece of paper. Plain paper is best. That gives you lots of space to print on. Mine's obviously white, but you might want to use the back of an envelope or some other kind of plain paper you have in your home. You'll notice here that I've got a piece of kitchen roll, and if you have a piece of that, brilliant. If you don't, a magazine or a tea towel works just as well. This will be put underneath your piece of paper to provide a little cushion so that when we do start printing and stamping, you'll get really lovely results. The fork is something that we will be using as a tool along with these other resources. If you've got a pen, pencils, have a look at the shapes on the end of the lids, and that will give you some idea of the kind of marks that you're able to make with them. You'll also see some lids. They're from milk bottles or toothpaste tubes. They're really helpful. I've also got a glue stick, but we won't be using any actual glue today. I'll just be using the top and the bottom of the stick. You can also see that I've got a cardboard tube. We'll be using the ends of this and also cutting it up to provide some other little tools. So you'll need a pair of scissors. The last couple of things are you'll need a ruler. It doesn't have to be this big. It just will create some really lovely lines in our printing. And the last thing you'll notice are some little pieces of Lego. Now you won't actually need those. That is just something to get you thinking. I'm using them today in my work, but it's a way of making me think, right, what else could I use? And maybe after you've watched the video, you'll go on a little hunt at home and see a few things you might want to try and experiment. So we're going to get our space ready to start our activity. So just spend a moment collecting the things you need, and then we will set out our piece of paper and get started. So we're going to get ready to prepare a space to print. And what's really important is that you've got a nice hard table or surface. So if you're happy working at a table or a desk, great. If you prefer to stand, then maybe work on a kitchen surface. If you're more comfortable sitting down, that's fine too. Maybe find yourself a hardback book and rest that on your knee or your lap, and that will be just absolutely fine. The next thing you need to do is get your kitchen roll. If you're not using kitchen roll, your tea towel, just lay it out really flat, unfold it. If you're using a magazine, just place it onto your table, and then simply put your piece of plain paper on top. And what you've created is a lovely little cushion, so that when you do push in your objects to make those marks and lines, you'll get really lovely clear results. You'll notice that my kitchen roll doesn't quite reach all the way under my paper. So I've just got to be careful and remember that when I want to print on this part of the paper, I'll just move it along so that I have got that cushion before I print. So we're just going to take a look at the piece of art that has inspired this activity. And what you'll see in front of you is Composition 8 by Kandinsky. This activity gives us the chance to almost jump into the piece of art and really look at the shapes and lines in a little bit more detail. So when I look at this piece of work, my eye is drawn to the many circles that I can see. I particularly love these arches here, these semicircles, and I'm really taken by this really busy area up here. So today in our activity we're going to use our materials not to recreate a Kandinsky piece of work, but to be inspired by the lines and shapes that he created and used to make something for ourselves. So let's get started. You just need your ink stamp pad and a few of the objects that we talked about. I'm going to begin with looking at circles and curves. So let's get started. Hello again. So you've got your resources ready, your space is all set up, ready to print. And so what we're going to do is spend a little moment or two just talking about the artist that has inspired this video today. So Kandinsky was born in Russia, in Moscow, in 1866. And as he grew up, he never really pursued a career in art. He studied law and economics, but a few things happened in his life that had a bit of a big impact on him. And then he made the decision in about 1896, apparently, to then become an artist. He had seen Claude Monet's work, and in particular one of his paintings, which is called The Haystacks. I've got a little picture of it here. And Kandinsky just loved the way Monet had painted the haystacks and the way he had used his techniques. It seemed to really excite him and make him want to look at things in a less realistic way. And so that began his journey into searching for how he would paint. The second thing was that he listened to some music by a composer called Richard Wagner and immediately was captured. And by listening to the music and realizing the power it had, he really felt that his art could be a kind of partnership of both. And this was really mainly because he had a very rare condition called synesthesia. I hope I pronounced that right. Which is where you have senses that kind of trigger one another. So in Kandinsky, he had a condition then that meant when he heard music, he described seeing colours and shapes, lines, and also when he painted, he heard music. So this real gift really guided him and his art. And today we're going to use the ink stamp pad and a piece of work by Kandinsky just to have some fun and explore how we can make marks and shapes using some things you might find around your home to create a piece of work inspired by him and to just really enjoy the whole process. So the piece of work we're going to look at is called Composition 8. Kandinsky liked to title some of his artworks with musical themed ideas, and I've chosen this particular piece as it will lend itself really beautifully to our activity today. So now that you've got everything ready, we know a little tiny bit more about Kandinsky. I'm really excited, so let's get started. So let's get started. We're going to start with circles and curves and dots, and we are looking in front of us now again at Kandinsky's piece of art. And you can see that not only does he use a lot of circles in this piece, but they are spread all over the piece of work, and some are overlapping and some circles are even within circles. So what's really lovely is this activity is for you to just be free and explore and just have fun with the marks that you're going to make. So the first thing I'd like you to do is take your pen, take the lid off and press it gently into your ink pad. You might need to do it a few times just so you've got enough ink on the end of your pen. And then gently press onto your paper and you'll create a beautiful, lovely circle. And really it's up to you how and where you'd like to stamp. This piece of paper is really just for experimenting, making mistakes and just exploring the different ways you can put your marks together. So maybe spend a little moment having a go and just enjoying the lovely feeling you have with the shapes you're making. You can try the other end of your pen, and that sometimes creates a different kind of mark, which you can see, and you might even want to put it inside one of the ones that you've made already. So even from just the lid of a pen, you can see just the different kind of marks you can make. It's really exciting. So I'm going to pop that back on there and grab my pencil and do the same. So you'll start to get a feeling for how much pressure that you need to put on. And you'll really notice that that little cushion underneath the kitchen roll or the magazine really helps create a really clear mark. So you can see there, just by using my pencil and my pen, the difference and the variety that you can get. So if you haven't got a glue stick, a cork works just as well to give you a bigger circle and perhaps a contrast to the ones you've already made. So I'm not really thinking too much about where I'm putting my objects right now. I'm just enjoying having a go. And then I'm going to turn it over the other end. And you've guessed it, off I go again. So you can see how it starts to build up and it's looking actually really interesting already. All right, we're going to move on to a few lids now, and obviously it depends what you have lying around. I know your ink pad may not be as big as a glass that you have, but sometimes you can just use the edge. So perhaps that's something you want to explore. And that can often give you just a nice curve if you just put a little bit of ink on just one side of it. And maybe several of those together. It's something you want to try. I'm just gently pressing, I'm not pressing too hard. And sometimes the more you press, the darker the print. Yeah, just have a go at exploring the kind of marks that you're able to make. So I'm just going to finish with my toothpaste tube, I think, and see where that goes. Let's have a little think. Now you can see that this has actually created more of a ring kind of shape, which is really lovely. And again, that could be something that you could experiment with, going over a shape you've already stamped. Don't be afraid as well to go right to the very edge, and even if you feel like it, go right off the edge. Art doesn't always have to have a border and perhaps that's something you want to explore. So the last thing I've got for you to try is your cardboard tube to create circles and curves. You can just use the very end, which you've probably gathered already now, and you might need to press it in a few times just to get a good covering, and then gently push and sometimes hold in that position just to create the mark. And a little wiggle can sometimes create a really interesting sort of blurred line at the end. Now, with your scissors, if you just carefully like to cut a little snip all the way along of your tube, and maybe leave a little bit of a gap before you snip away again. And what you'll get is a little kind of rectangular shape, but we'd like you to curve it just by gently pushing the ends together. And then have a go at pushing that lovely curve into your ink pad. And again, one of my favourite little shapes from that Kandinsky print is that semicircle. So it could be that this is something you'd like to explore. Maybe one down here. The more you bend your little piece of cardboard, the tighter the curve can be. So really kind of have a little explore about what kind of effects you get with that. And again, just maybe use one edge. It's really interesting to see how your tools create the marks they do. Okay, we're just going to take a little pause before we explore lines and more kind of angular shapes. But when Kandinsky was thinking and talking about circles, he often described them as shapes that made him feel quite spiritual. He linked shapes to emotions quite strongly, and he also felt that the music would often create these shapes in his mind. He would see shapes, and so when you are making your marks, have a think about the shapes that you're making and maybe how they're making you feel. Okay, so now we're looking again at Kandinsky's Composition 8, and we're looking at the lines and the squares and the grids and the different kinds of angular shapes that we can see. I really particularly like this part here, and that's really how my inspiration for my fork came in to my mind when I was thinking about this activity. You'll also notice that he does use squares and also really beautiful long lines as well as short ones. And I think it's really important for you to just not feel that you're having to recreate this, but just to look at your work you've done already and just see where you think the lines should go. So we're going to start with a fork. So simply, if you haven't got a cutlery sort of metal one, a plastic one will do just as well. And if you just roll your fork all the way to the end, you'll notice that the ink covers all the way down to the very tip. And then you just gently press onto your paper. to create those lovely long marks. I'll put maybe one there. And if you don't want to have a really long little lines there, little short ones, just gently don't push all the way down on your fork. Just maybe do a little bit of a bend and you'll get a much shorter line. One of the things that works really nicely with this is to use your fork to create a grid, a bit like in this area here or this area here. So we're going to have a go at looking at the line we've already done with our fork and just going again across to create that lovely grid. Now that's something that later you might want to add colour with felt tips or colour pencils, just to explore some of the colours that you'd like for your art. And as I'm making these shapes with the fork, I'm just thinking how maybe they are connecting to possibly two sets together. And what's nice is not only am I getting those lovely lines, but I'm also getting an interesting shape within the lines. So I think I'll just do one more just here, like that. Okay, so I'm going to take my ruler now. If you've only got a short one, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to start with the end. So again, just gently press the ruler into your pad and then off you go. And again, because it's quite a narrow edge, it's sometimes worth just holding the ruler in place just a little while and just gently pushing in to that cushion to get your mark you'd like. And then maybe thinking about how your line goes across a shape you've already got. And just see how maybe you will create different marks than even the ones I'm talking about right now. So this is a nice one to do where you literally bounce with your ruler. So you can put quite a bit of ink on it, just have a little check and see whether you've got some there. And then if you find a place, kind of keep the contact with your paper at the end and just gently turn and you get quite a lovely little shape there. So as you've probably guessed already, if you want a longer line, you can use the ink all the way along your ruler. It's really up to you. Sometimes it's helpful to hold the ink pad up and just run your ruler across so you get some covering. There you go. And we're going to think carefully about where this is going to go. So I'm going to try there and then lift it up. What's nice is you get a mixture of thick and thin lines, just like Kandinsky did in his work. And there we go. I'm going to just do, I think, just one more across here. There we are. Okay, the last thing I'm going to try is using the Lego. Now, it isn't something that you have to use, but I discovered this just really by accident, and I really enjoyed and liked the way that you were able to get lovely kind of rectangular shapes, squares. It's a nice contrast to what we've done already. So be aware that, as you can see, the ink has actually touched the little dots inside, so that will also print. And sometimes if you don't push it too hard, you just get the outline of your brick. So I'm quite happy to get those, and I'm going to put that there and just press gently and then lift. And again, I'm going to go somewhere here and lift. A really nice contrast. You start thinking, oh, I really like that area. But right now it's not so much about planning, it's about just playing and seeing the lovely shapes that you can create. I'm just going to put, just always be careful that you've got that cushion underneath, because that does mean you get a lovely fresh kind of print. I'm going to leave that one there and that one there. So Kandinsky also believed that when he saw squares he felt very calm. He felt that they were a shape, they were sort of something that would put your mind at ease. I don't know if you agree with that, because he also believed that the triangle was quite an angry shape. It's quite nice to think about as you're making your shapes, again, how they're making you feel, and the kind of message then that maybe even your art would give to somebody. So as we come to the end of our experimenting, I really hope you've enjoyed just finding out and discovering how you can make some really interesting marks with some very simple things you have at home. So as we come to the end of our time together in this video, I'd just like you to take a look at the marks you've made and just take a moment to think about, is there a particular area that you find really interesting? You might want to change the position of it, and I often find that really changes how I feel about what I've made. So maybe explore which way you'd like to look at your piece of work. And then if you would like to, you can leave it as it is, and then maybe choose a piece of music to listen to and have a go. If you want to watch the video again, just to remind yourself of some of the techniques, and just see what happens when you listen to different kinds of music, and the different marks you feel that you'd like to make. The last thing I'd like to talk a little bit about is Kandinsky and his ideas on colour. We've used a black ink stamp pad, and we can also add colour to your work using colour pencils, felt tip pens, and it's just nice to know a few little things that you can have in mind when you're colouring, or just adding little bits to your work. Particularly that Kandinsky thought about colour and shape a lot, and he had some quite strong opinions and views about how colours were often linked to feelings and shapes, and particular musical instruments. So a couple of things that I thought you might find interesting when you're thinking about adding colour to your work is to listen out for the sounds that you hear and perhaps instruments that you might recognise in your piece of music. For example, Kandinsky, when he heard trumpets, for him that was yellow. If you might have heard a flute playing, it would be light blue for him. Violins would often remind him of greens, and something like an English horn would make him grab his orange, and that would be shown through his work. He also had some opinions about shapes and colours. Like we talked about his thoughts on a circle being quite a spiritual shape. He often described circles as being a bit dull. I have to be honest, I don't really agree with that, but you may have your own opinion. But blues were the colours that he often connected with circles. You might not find all the circles will be blue in his work, but it's just an example of how he connected those two together. Our lovely Lego that we used to create these squares and kind of rectangular shapes. Again, if you remember, we talked about him feeling that a square was a calm shape, and he actually attached the colour red, and if I look together with you at the piece of art that we've been inspired in with today, you can see that there's quite a few little red squares, pinkish marks here, not all of them, but it just gives you that extra understanding of how he connected music, shape and colour in his work. He has and will be remembered as one of the foundation artists in abstract art, and I know that hopefully after today you might know a little bit more about him, and also how you can think about making marks with really simple things around the home, to create something that is like a memory for you of a piece of music that you've heard. So thank you so much for joining with me today, and I really look forward to exploring this myself further, and I really hope that it's given you the confidence to try different ways of making marks and to really just enjoy it. So I'll leave you with a quote to go with our art today. This is Kandinsky, and he said, "I saw all my colours in my mind. They stood before my eyes. Wild, almost crazy lines were sketched in front of me." So perhaps now, like Kandinsky, choose a piece of music and see where it takes you with your work. Thank you so much.